Welcome back to Season 2 of That's So Second Millennium, the Catholic Science podcast, where we look forward to the new synthesis in the new millennium between faith, philosophy, and science. Welcome to episode 89 of That's So Second Millennium. This is Paul, and once again I am hurting for Bill. I hope we make connections in the next week. get a interview episode, or at least a conversation episode between the two of us out there. Today, I'm just going to take a few minutes and sort of warm up to the conversation that I hope Bill and I get to have this coming week. So I floated this idea to Bill. It's been rattling in my mind for quite a while. To think about, it's, multiple episodes worth of content, but to think about, as we're starting a new decade, we don't get to start a new millennium just every time we want to, but this is the end of a decade for sure, and we're facing, in this country, a presidential election, as well as, the idea that we're in 2020. 2020, that sounds awfully far into the future, doesn't it? Those of us born in the 20th century spent some time in the 20th century. It's like, how can this be? When I would read speculations about planetary missions going on, maybe in hopefully we'll get it done by 2020, or else, for example, Pluto might be too far away. Well, fortunately, we did get that done, it seems like. We got New Horizons off the ground. That's a good thing. But in any case, it's what are we going to, and of course I look at my own life, and, my own, every one of our individual lives is a microcosm of the whole. And so, what am I doing with my own life that, what am I going to do in the coming decade of my own life? I turned 40 this year. Of course, I'm thinking about that sort of boundary thing as well. But, from the perspective of a podcast, what could we do? What do we, as a church, as an American church, as Americans per se, how should we spend this next decade? What are things rattling around? It's one of those things that can be dangerous because it's a conversation that can get too grandiose. And Lord knows, I have spent far too much of my life not managing my own life in any way worthy of the name. And, fully in the unmanageability that the first step of the 12 steps talks about, admitted that we were powerless over fill in the blank, whatever your addiction is, and that our lives were unmanageable, that our lives had become unmanageable. Well, my life was never manageable, I can tell you that. But, nevertheless, there's also, we live in an era where representative democracy is the norm. And in every era, human beings have a political, every human being has a political role to play in their own system, no matter how small, no matter how oppressed they are. And we're certainly not in that situation. We have some amount of say, and we should probably, my very small opinion, use it a little better. It's probably not a really controversial position to take at this point. That those of us in the United States of America, let alone the West as a whole, let alone democracies as a whole, should probably look at each other and say, are we using our votes all that well? Are we using our other forms of political influence as well as we could? How could we use them better? I mean, that's always a question, right? How could we use them better? So, let's, I'm just going to throw a few of those out there before I wrap up. I've, been on a retreat and I am beyond exhausted. I have gone from the beginning of August to today not taking care of myself in the way that I should, which includes deliberately not just taking time to sleep, but also just winding down in the afternoon. I mean, I have to face my own life at this particular point, as someone who is somewhere between an invalid who needs to convalesce and someone who is trying to do immensely hard work, and therefore, in the times when he's not doing that hard work and should, budget the amount of hard work that he tries to do, he should be bloody well sleeping and resting and doing things to recover himself. And I guess that's something I'm learning at this season of life, is what I have to do in order to do that. So in any case, so I'll just throw a few ideas out there. in terms of, gosh, I'll start with this at random. Thinking of the church in the United States, of course, it's, across the developed world, us postmodern, people who are addicted to comfort and certainly can't take seriously the idea of having a life without sexual gratification, vocations to the celibate, the celibate vocations. The number of people willing to embrace celibate vocations has cratered, and it looks, I wonder how many people really allow themselves to look at what the numbers are going to look like before they get better. What are we going to do about that? And of course, thinking about in my particular corner of the universe, here in Southeast Indiana, and thinking about all of the little rural parishes that have been closed. And of course, in the Catholic Church, we run things via centralized dioceses. And yet, we do have our own influence. And I wonder, all the trauma and all the griping, which there's unquestionably a lot of griping, and I have to think there's some amount of, using the closure of parishes as an excuse to, as your point of departure out of the Catholic Church. I don't know. Somebody has to be taking statistics on that. And you think about what could we do as the rest of us Catholics, as the laity, if we are in such a parish, in such a, in St. Morris, Indiana, or something like that. And this is just, I don't know. I don't have the answers, but I think about it a lot, and I have a podcast, so I suppose I'll share them with you and, again, invite anyone who would like to talk back to me to visit the website and get in contact with us. I would love to have this discussion. Of course, I'll be looking for other places to have this discussion as well. But, make a proposal. Look at your other parishioners. We don't want this church to close. Our ancestors built this church in the, 1850s, let us say. They got off the boat from Germany. They wanted a better life for themselves. They came to this country where there was, representative democracy, like we were just talking about, as opposed to a Kaiser or landed nobility and whatever else was, in the way of people making decisions for themselves. And they came here and they made decisions for themselves, and they got themselves a homestead, and they built a farm, or they moved to town and they built a shop and practiced a trade, and they built themselves a church. And somehow or another, they finagled a priest, probably because one of their sons, or several of their sons, went off to seminary. And some of them were smart enough and dedicated enough to stick. So what do we do now? We don't have enough priests to go around. Okay, that's the problem. But, at least, I think I have heard, people say that they're worried about there being too many permanent deacons, and that that's somehow going to be taking the place of priests. And I just wonder if that's not completely backward. I think the gulf between priests and the people in the pew, to me, just thinking about it from my own emotional perspective and thinking about my perspective on it as a child, not so much how it is today, but I think of I felt that priests were so far away and they were so alien and living such a different life that I couldn't comprehend. And the thing about a deacon is that they're living a life that's somewhere in between. This is, this is what it seems to me. And that's a very valuable thing, that they've gone through formation. They can talk about it. I would want, every parish in the Archdiocese of Indianapolis to have 7 deacons, like the first class that the apostles ordained. I think that would be an excellent, beautiful thing for as many parishes to have as many deacons as practical. And, so parishes that are currently in this season of the church lacking in priests, deacons can't take the place of priests. They can't. We know that. We're going to have to cycle the priests around that we have. And yet, the deacons can help. And then, of course, we look at ourselves and what do we as laity who aren't ordained in any way going to do? To take custody of our own parish, make a proposal, get together, write a letter to the Archbishop, send a deputation, get 3 of us together, and say, we want this parish, one way or another, to continue to exist. And, I know that you're limited in the number of priests, and we're sorry, and that we haven't sent any more sons to the seminary. For that matter, we're sorry we haven't sent any more sons or daughters to be lay religious, to be, female, to be nuns, to be religious brothers, and doing their part to pray for vocations among all of the other things that religious should pray for. But we want to keep this building together, and we want to keep this community together. And so, as often as you're willing to send a priest, as often as you're able, we're going to make sure that there's a building here for them to come to, and we're going to make sure that there's a community here for them to come to. And we're going to offer at least this many of us, men as elders, to come and, get themselves prepared and become deacons. Meet in the middle and take responsibility for ourselves. I mean, that's the accusation leveled against the Catholic Church. And, if we let that be true, well, then that is a pretty shitty thing, to be perfectly honest. That's not how Catholicism has to be. It's a perversion of it when it is frankly my argument. So that's a sampling. Interested to see where that conversation with Bill would go. Interested to see where that conversation with anyone would go. I think for a moment about, what's the United States position in the world? So we think about things like immigration or what we're going to do about China or Russia for that matter, but China in particular. So we're a country of 300 million people in a world of 6.5, 7 billion people at this point. So a non-negligible share, but not that big. And I don't know about anyone else, but I, scratch my head and think that as a Catholic, what is my hope for the world in the long term is that there aren't these huge disparities between, and not because we've knocked the, standard of living and life expectancy and whatnot in the developed world down, but that we've, that the life expectancy and economic expectancy and so forth of people elsewhere in the world has gone up. Not, hopefully, that they're living, by any means, all of the current ingredients of the Western lifestyle, including all of our sprawl and excessive energy consumption and resource consumption and whatnot. And certainly the poor ways in which we dispose of our waste. Hopefully we'll do something different than that. Hopefully we'll all do something different than that. But nevertheless, we want everybody to have, the chance to have enough food to eat and care for when they get sick and, advice on how to live long and prosperous lives, certainly physically healthy lives. We all want that, right? Don't we want that in the long term? Don't we want in the long term for everybody in Zimbabwe or Guatemala or Honduras or all of these places where terrible things are going on, Venezuela, all the parts of Mexico, isn't that what we certainly as Christians want for everyone? Even if we're not Christians, wouldn't we at least sort of nod and say, well, yeah, that would be better? It would be better, wouldn't it? If there weren't these huge disparities, what kind of immigration problem would we have? We wouldn't have one. But in a world like that, okay, so if there's 7 billion, or maybe there'll be 10 or 20 billion by that point, the planet, if we live our lives appropriately, I bet the planet could hold 20 billion people. The United States, if we have the same proportion now as we do now, will be a small player, relatively speaking. We'll be just one of many in this, large world. And if China has the share that it has, it will be a more prominent player. For that matter, so will India. So what is the long term? What should we do as a country? And what should we do as individuals? And this is a huge question that, I'm not about to try to answer, but to think about, I would think that our long-term strategy should be, all right, here we are in the Americas, and the Americas, do have these beautiful oceans on either side of them. And, the old world, the old world is going to have to sort itself out. in the long run, we're not going to be able to continue meddling in all of the things that we feel is our obligation to meddle in. And against that day when the Americas are, simply a proportional by population influence to the rest of the world, we should probably all try to band together the best that we can. And we have a lot of advantages. I mean, it's very sad that all of it's tremendously sad. It's one of the great human tragedies that so many Native Americans died during the course of the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, 19th, on into the 20th. And their languages with them. But, making the best of the situation that we have, you don't need to learn many languages to have the run of the Americas. You can learn Spanish, and English, and Portuguese, and that's not that different. It's not that bad. And some French. And then where can you not go? Is there anywhere they speak Dutch? Is there Dutch Guyana still? Do they actually speak Dutch there? The French they speak in Haiti is a little tricky, but, seriously, we have advantages here. And, while I don't exactly want to throw the obligation on school systems that are struggling, of which there are a lot in America, in the United States, boy, if you're affluent, if you're at all affluent, teach your kids Spanish. Just do it. Seriously. And if you don't, and if you're not doing it because you care about people in Latin America, do it because it'll let you have the run of the continent. You'll be able to go places on 2 continents and not be fleeced by the locals. Just think about that, right? There's a lot of places to see. A lot of better climates, especially here in December, I'm thinking. I would rather be in Colombia right now. I sure would. I was talking to somebody in Colombia earlier today. Yeah. So that's a little erratic and over the top, a little odd, but that's just what I'm thinking about today. Like I said, I hope to talk to Bill about it, and we'll see if we can get somewhere. It's a little it's not directly related to faith and science per se, but it's economics is in there, and political science. That's legitimately a thing. That's worth talking about. It's worth thinking about for the future, because, critical thinking, ultimately, that's the spirit of science. That's that's the great human tendency that we need in order to live our lives better that science provides to us. Or at least, it doesn't provide it to us, but it needs it. And it's a great example of what critical thinking can do for you. It can take you an awfully long way. So with that, yeah, that's it for the week. And I managed to go to 18 minutes. That's amazing. So I hope you enjoyed it some, and I would love to hear back from you. In any case, God bless. Have a great Advent and a beautiful, we'll probably celebrate the Feast of the Immaculate Conception tomorrow rather than tonight, rather than today, Sunday, when I'm celebrating it. So think about that. Think about Mary. Think about her life. And try to think about some of the details we don't necessarily read over and over again in the scriptures. How did she get to where she was? Read a little bit about what we at least speculate about her life, what the extra-canonical tradition is about Mary's life, growing up with Joachim and Anne and being left at the temple, just like, Samson or Samuel, somewhat like Samson and just like Samuel. Think about how strange that must have been, how much she had to trust in God in a situation where, in the best contemporary, feminist thinking, she was probably in a position where she could have been taken advantage of, and, in any case, was certainly swimming against the tide. So, yeah, all right, well, I'll let you go, and we'll talk to you again soon. If you enjoyed this episode, or it made you think, please subscribe to That's So Second Millennium via Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Podbean, or your podcast service of choice.